What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Let's Talk Movies. I'm Brad.
Miguel.
And today, this is the middle part in our decade series. We are talking movies of the 1980s. All right, guys, we are talking the 1980s tonight. This is going to be a fun one. At least for me, this is one of my favorite decades in motion picture history. What about you?
The 80s was great because it had a lot of coke.
Did, as I have my coke. And we don't mean cocaine.
Yeah, it was the start of Coca-Cola becoming more popular. When
there was Coca-Cola.
I
actually just bought this in Gatlinburg. My wife and I went to Gatlinburg the other weekend, last weekend. And we went in this. It was I didn't even tell you this. It was a really cool like pop culture store. Yeah. And it just had old. It had some like old Michael Myers masks. It had like a whole bunch of different like concert posters, like old Bob Marley, Beatles, Springsteen, stuff like that. I actually bought this old Coca-Cola cup. It was like $1.20.
That looks like something I would like get at like a gas station restaurant.
Right. It fits in with our whole retro vibe.
True. Are you drinking your beer out of that?
No, I'm drinking water out of this. My beer, in true 80s fashion, is in my Christmas vacation beer cup.
Holy shit. I'm prepared too. Look, bubble gum.
There you go. You are.
Forrest Gump, right?
Did that come out in the 80s, though?
No, Forrest Gump.
I know. Did Forrest Gump come out in the 80s?
I don't know. I'm probably dumb as fuck.
I don't think Forrest Gump came out in the 80s.
Okay, well, you know what? Eat a solid dick, okay?
I'm pretty sure it came out in the 90s.
If it
Good
did,
job.
Oh well.
Good job, Miguel.
I'm just a decade behind. 94. I'm an asshole now.
Yeah. I was gonna say I didn't think it came out in the 80s.
Anyways.
What are you drinking tonight? What you drinking? What's your drinking, your cup?
It's this so I'm on a cheap budget right now, so the
Same.
brand literally says beer.
What?
Yeah, it's just cheap beer.
Did you go to like an episode of The Simpsons? Like what?
No, there's cheap beer that you buy, and it
go to like the back
beer.
shelf in Walmart.
Yeah, it's like $1.99.
Oh my god.
It gets the job done.
I'm drinking one of those big old fat tall Coronas. I bought that in Gatlinburg, but I didn't drink it, so we put it in the cooler and brought it home. What'd you watch this week?
I just finished watching Knives Out again, which is a dope movie, and I just saw Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Part 5?
Yeah, part 5.
I haven't seen part 5. Was it good?
It's absolutely baller, man.
I've heard amazing things. I'll probably watch it tomorrow. But yeah, I definitely want to check out part 5.
Honestly, like I'm almost certain like we have to do an episode on the Falcon and the Winter Soldier because it is a solid TV show. Yeah. And I'll say right now, it's better than WandaVision. I'm gonna say it. Dude. You know why? Because it's not being drowned by so many fan theories.
The conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it's not being drowned by it. So there's no expectations. We really don't know what's happening after every single episode. Right. We get an episode and we're like, okay, well, we don't know what the hell is going to happen.
They're very different. I will say I was pleasantly surprised because I loved WandaVision. I thought WandaVision was awesome.
I loved it, guys.
They're very different, but I like it. It feels, honestly, at first I kind of felt like Falcon didn't feel MCU-ish. It kind of felt kind of strange. But
it was very groundish. You know what I mean?
It feels like the MCU now. Like I feel like the same feeling I got watching The Winter Soldier or Captain America or any of those like mid-tier MCU films. I get the same vibe.
This is a very mid-tier TV show or feature film of the MCU like franchise. And how can I put this lightly? the shit is rocking the bed. I mean, it's hitting everything. Story, theme, the whole plot, everything is awesome. Even though it doesn't feel entirely connected to what the plans for the greater MCU is. Like, it's a solid show, and it's presenting a lot of different themes and ideas that none of us really thought of, like in our day-to-days. So it's just a solid show. And when we do an analysis of the whole show, oh god, I'll have a lot to say about it because it's fantastic.
Definitely. Well, my original thought was to do, because for WandaVision there were 9 episodes, I believe.
9, yeah.
We did a breakdown of the first half after like the first 4 or 5, and then we did a breakdown of the last half. And I thought, well, hey, we'll do that again with Falcon. But then I realized there were only 2 episodes left, and I was like, no, we'll just do it. We'll do a bonus episode and we'll recap the whole series.
Yes.
And we'll throw a bonus episode in there. So that'll be dope.
What'd you watch?
Man, honestly, I've been busy this week. I didn't really watch a whole lot of anything. We watched a couple more episodes of the X-Files. We're almost finished with season 9. I think we have 2 more episodes in season 9, and then we'll hit up the movie. But really, it's been a busy week, man. I haven't watched a whole lot. But
I feel you. I feel you there.
Yeah. Speaking of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, you brought up the X-Files. Yeah.
I brought up the X-Files, and you were bringing up conspiracy theories before. How about the Pentagon declassifying all those UFO files?
It's the same thing I text you whenever you text me like 3 in the fucking morning talking about this shit. I literally said, I was like, look, guys, all of us, you, me, our mom, our dogs, we all know aliens exist. The only person we were waiting on to officialize it was the government.
Yeah.
That was it.
I think, like, I don't know. I'm somebody, and I know a lot of people have a problem with, the whole whether alien life exists or not, that conversation, because whether it's because of their faith or because of their beliefs or because of their outlook on science and the possibility of the whole thing. I've always been somebody, like, I feel like I've always had an open mind about stuff like that, about anything like that, whether it's God or whether it's the paranormal or anything like that. I've always had an open mind. And I think to say that we are alone in the universe is incredibly naive.
It is.
I really do. And I think they're trying to ease people into the idea. I think that's partially why they've started uncovering all this shit, is because they're trying to ease people into the idea. Because you and I both know, dude, if the United Nations came out and they're like, we're holding this global press conference and we are going to announce that extraterrestrial life exists. Like, we are not alone. Like, we're going to show you.
Yeah.
There would be chaos in the streets. People would be buying guns. People would be buying ammo. People would be buying food and water. It would be chaos. So I think they kind of have to ease people in. And I think I was texting my parents about this today. I honestly think it'll be within our lifetime. I really do, that we find out.
Like, honestly, like, I was thinking this this afternoon. What if, because like these things are being, like, the footage that they're showing are like government videos of like different branches like videotaping it. What if they're saying it's aliens as a cover-up?
Cover up for what?
That they're making different spacecrafts, or they're making,
I don't know,
experimental thing. Because look, the public is much more inclined to just say, yeah, it's fucking aliens, than the government making new aircrafts. So like, I feel like these are like test footage of these new aircrafts, and they get leaked, and the government doesn't want other nations to know we're building new stuff, so they're just like, yep, it's aliens.
Well, do you remember last year that guy? I believe he was from the Middle East. I don't remember where. I'll have to look that up again. But he had come out and said, like, the whole Space Force thing, like what Trump did with the Space Force, and like he basically said that like it's been like over 75 years that like the United States and the United Nations and people have known, and they've had contact with them and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's interesting. I've always,
the whole topic of that is really interesting.
Yeah, I'm not even saying it's little green men in spaceships. I don't even mean it like that. But I think there's something out there. There is something. They know there's water on other planets. They know there's oxygen on other planets. They know that there's bacteria out in space. You know, there's got to be something else besides Earth. And you know, it's kind of funny because like the people from the Pentagon, like there was an interview I was watching today. I think it was on the Today Show that they were talking about it, and they were like, you know, somebody straight up asked like one of the Pentagon officials, they were like, "Are these things in the video extraterrestrial?" And he's like, humans don't have, like, we do not have the technology to create a spacecraft like we're seeing in these videos. And the reporter's like, so it's aliens. And they're like, no.
It's
that's how they look. It's like it's not human, but it's also not alien.
But you see how he's saying that kind of brings me back to what I'm thinking. Like, they're trying to like downplay the fact that they're making these like advanced like aircrafts.
You're getting into some Mega Godzilla crap now.
Hey, bro, I'm more grounded. I'm more grounded. Look, I understand there is possible forms of alien life, but it's pretty much it's the ideology I take from like Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he's like, if there are aliens in this world, they are either not sentient beings that are advanced, or they are, and they visit us already, and they deemed us unworthy, that we're not smart enough to be contacted with. You know what I mean?
They don't want to communicate with us.
Yeah,
they want nothing to do with us.
Yeah, like we're over here dumb as shit throwing nuclear missiles at each other, and they probably think we're just throwing heavy rocks at one another. So like whenever that reporter like asked the guy, he tried to like downplay, like there's no way we can make this kind of stuff, but in reality they are. And when the reporter was like, well, is it aliens then? The guy probably like paused. He was like, holy shit, that's a good excuse. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Well,
yeah, sure.
But they won't say yes, but they also imply that it's not human and that it's from outer space.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
It's just funny. The whole thing is just kind of,
I think it's
not funny, but it's kind of funny, and it kind of makes me feel like Fox Mulder inside, and I dig it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but I'm all for it.
I've always had an open mind with stuff like that. I had a paranormal experience when I was a kid.
What did you see?
Did I ever tell you that? I don't. We were supposed to be talking about the 80s. We've gone on a long intro rant. So when I was a kid, I'm originally from Florida, and when I was a kid,
so your case is invalid because Floridians are just fucking crazy.
Yes.
Like, I don't even want to hear this anymore. No, I'm kidding.
we had this townhouse when I was a kid, and I don't remember doing this. I don't remember anything about this, but I've heard the story so many times from my parents. I was with my mom, and we got home. I don't know if we were at the grocery store, where we were coming from, but I mean, I was like preschool age. Like I was young. I mean, I was young enough. Obviously, I don't remember this, but you walk in, and there were stairs that went up, and then a landing, and then more stairs, or something along those lines. And there was a mirror. There was a mirror at the top of the stairs where you could see the hallway behind you. And we walked in, and, you know, I'm standing there. My mom's getting our stuff in or whatever. And I looked up and I said, who is that? And she's like, who's who? It was just her and I in the house. Nobody else was there. And I was like, that guy. Who's that guy up there standing in the hallway? She looked, didn't see anybody. And you know, it's a thing. Supposedly kids can see shit that adults can't see.
I hate that.
They can see paranormal stuff. I don't know. I don't know if that's true.
It makes me so sad with that. That theory makes me so sad because it just means like my mind is like not as, you know what I mean?
Not as capable as a child's.
Yeah, like that kind of pisses me off a little bit. So yeah. I don't like to think about it like that.
But anyways, I have zero recollection that this ever happened. I've just heard the stories. But my mom was so scared. Like we came out, like she like grabbed me and like came out of the house and called my dad. And my dad went in. Nobody had broken in. There was nobody there. I mean, like we sat there. Nobody came out of the house. I mean, there was nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
But I swore up and down that there was somebody standing there at the top of the stairs in the mirror, and then I could see him. I have no right.
Man or an alien?
I think it was a man. Is it an alien?
I'm just saying. We're talking
signs,
about space.
Signs.
We're talking about like aliens, and you just over telling me about maybe a fucking ghost story. That's why I was curious.
I don't know. And I don't know.
I get why you did that.
And I was an imaginative kid anyways. So part of me is like, did I really see something, or was I just being like, was I off in my own imagination?
Yeah.
So I don't know. But the point of the story is I've always had an open mind about stuff like that. But let's hop into the 80s movies. So this is the middle chapter in our decade series where we're talking about the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And again, this is going to be a loaded episode because we have no chance of getting through everything.
None.
There's no way.
The 80s was just such a core time.
The 80s is probably the most packed and loaded decade in motion picture history. Mm-hmm. It just is. There's so much. And you know, I'm sure over time we'll unpack this even more. We'll talk about 80s horror. We'll talk about 80s sci-fi. We'll talk about 80s action. Just all of those crazy things. You know, honestly, I almost thought about doing a top 10, but then I realized it's impossible to do a top 10. And it's honestly almost even impossible to do like a top 50 because there's so many good 80s movies across every genre. You know what I mean? So let's talk about the 80s a little bit in terms of overall. So some overall themes that we had. It was the return of studio-driven drugs, cocaine, as we talked about before. Coca-Cola, but cocaine.
Coca-Cola, yeah.
I'm kidding.
But I mean, let's be honest. Like honestly, most during that time, it was very
It was wild.
It was still a wild time.
It was a wild time.
Like 70s, 80s, and 90s. Like let's be honest, they were wild times. Granted, I'm sure whenever like you know 2050, they'll start like analyzing 2000s to 2010s, and they'll consider that a crazy time.
I don't know. The 2000s was a very flavorless decade. It really. Let's be complete. Compared to the 80s and 90s, dude, the 2000s.
What? It was white bread. Is that what you're saying?
Like if the 80s is like neon and crazy, the 2000s is like beige.
It was
or something like boring as hell.
I would imagine that be the 90s. 90s were beige.
The 90s had a lot of cool things about it.
Yeah, but it was pretty beige. Okay, no, let's not get into this rant. Let's not get into this rant. Okay.
So you had the return of studio-driven cinema. We talked last week about the 70s. Directors were really kind of taking control of their own projects and their own stories. And really directors were at the center of the project. They were the ones who were pushing the narrative forward, you know, in terms of the marketing and actually the creative control of the film. The 80s studios really started to kind of regain control. And they were the ones calling the shots. Another thing was high concept films. And I know you and I briefly talked about this before we started. The idea of, you know, films had a simple plot. They were predictable. They were understandable. It didn't have to be this whole crazy overarching story with all of these subplots throughout it like The Godfather would have been. It could be a simple story. A movie could just be stupid for the sake of being stupid. And, you know, we'll get into this in a minute, but 80s horror was a perfect example of that. Now, you had 80s horror movies that were amazing and that had a crazy, complex, awesome storyline, but you also had horror movies that were kind of spoofy, to be completely honest. You know what I mean?
Like, name a movie.
Like Return of the Living Dead. It's a great movie. It's one of the greatest zombie movies ever made. But it's a spoof. I mean, it's what it is. It's a spoof. It's hilarious. So that was kind of interesting. Again, we already talked about it started to get really wild. Everything was kind of off the wall. Like, you know, we talked again last week about how in the 70s, things were becoming less reserved, and they were showing things like nudity a little bit more. Darker themes were being presented, like domestic abuse, things of even sexual abuse and child abuse. And
Like
again, I'm bringing up The Godfather again. Look at how many different things are in The Godfather. I mean, everything from narcotics to violence and gore in movies were starting to get a little bit more. It was starting to get a little ballsier. And then the 80s, I mean, we just did the shot of cocaine straight off the table. I mean, we just went all out.
Yeah, so like the 70s was pretty much
cocaine.
It's like I said in the previous podcast about the 70s. The 70s was like a very push boundaries that no one has ever done before in the previous decades. The 80s was pretty much saying like, okay, well, now we have this new area to explore because it's common knowledge, it's common themes now. So let's just see what we can do, see if we can make more stories out of it. And so like the 80s pretty much piggybacked off what the 70s broke and just created this whole new decade because it was just a lot more freedom to try these different new ideas that no one has ever thought of. So that's why we got all of these crazy interesting movies that we'll talk about pretty soon. Like, I mean, if you watch most of them from the 80s, I mean, they were pretty solid movies because there was nothing stopping them. There was no like what's it called, societal norms that we had to abide by. Like it was just free reign. So that's why these stories were more what's the word, more open.
Yeah. Well, and even I'm glad you said that, because even look at pop culture. I mean, look at fashion. Shopping malls were starting to drop everywhere. I mean, you even see that in Stranger Things with Starcourt opening, because Stranger Things is set in the 1980s. It is. I mean, everybody was in shopping malls and fashion was crazy. Everything was colorful. Women I think women have a big role in that, because women weren't reserved anymore. Women were free to express themselves in different hairstyles, different clothing, colorful clothing, everything. We went from being very reserved and very traditional. And again, I say that loosely. I know I don't mean every man was wearing a tux in the 60s and 70s. That's not what I'm talking about. But overall, if you look at it, and even from the 80s to today, if you look at clothing, I mean, look at some of the clothes people wear today.
So the best way I can explain it right now is, again, the same way how it was with the movies, is that like in the 60s and 70s, it was like they were like breaking traditional norms. And whenever the 80s hit, that idea of breaking the norms just became the normal. So like the whole idea of like expressing yourself and being free with yourself and just like sharing your own style was pretty much the norm. Like you did that because that was how it was now. And that's why shopping malls, that's why all the new styles, that's why I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, don't blacklist me, but that's why a lot of women empowered movements were happening during the 80s in regards to movies.
For sure. For sure.
Because it was like all of the pushback was happening in the 60s and 70s because everyone wanted to stay that conservative ideal. But then when the 80s, it was literally like, okay, fine. Like conservative became not as well known. It was mainly just be as progressive as you can, like because we've done the work in the past decade. So this is just this is the year where we just let everyone do what they need to do, let them express themselves freely, and that's what we got.
It seemed like a time of exploration.
Yes,
where pop culture was changing. Look at John Hughes films. Look at the number of teenage comedy, dramedy, coming of age type. Look at The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, things like that. That all came out in the 80s. That all was born in that 80s pop culture shift where teenagers could kind of be whatever they wanted to be, but they were still under, their parents and what their parents grew up with. There was a lot of that. And then, another interesting thing that I actually didn't know until I was prepping for this episode, the MPAA, Motion Picture Association of America, they introduced the PG-13 rating in 1984 because they felt, but now back up. You had rated G, you had rated PG, and you had rated R. There was nothing in between PG and rated R. That's why Jaws is rated PG. Jaws is not a PG movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the same rating as I just played Monsters Inc. today at school for my kids.
That's hilarious.
Jaws is not. Jaws and Monsters Inc. are the same rating.
You think the MPAA would like change that, but
probably not. I don't know if you can.
Well,
yeah, they can to the MPAA. Of course they could.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, they felt that there needed to be more middle ground, and the reason it happened in 1984 was because you had Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins, and they thought both of those films, the Temple of Doom and Gremlins, were too violent. And really, they're not overly violent films, but they're not really PG. They're too violent to be a PG film, but they're not violent enough to be a rated R film. So they felt like there needed to be a little bit of middle ground. What do you think about that?
I think I'll be honest, like when I was young, like I hated that. I hated the ratings because, you know, I was used to watching 70s movies, which were pretty gory when you think about it. And
were you sheltered at all?
I was not sheltered whatsoever. By any stretch of the means.
Yeah.
I was looking for that word.
Means of the imagination. Is that what you were going for?
No, by any stretch of the means, I was not sheltered whatsoever.
Yeah.
And which pissed me off because whenever I would go see these movies, I remember I couldn't see them because they were either rated R or rated PG-13, and I was, 11, 12 at the time. I'm like, I've seen way worse than whatever you're about to show me right now. But I think the whole idea of like making PG-13 movie, making that middle ground, honestly, it probably helped a lot in regards to like box office scores and
probably
ticket buys, because when you talk about like Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, Temple of Doom, like those are pretty they're high school level movies, you know what I mean? So like,
you mean as in like a high schooler could go see that and be fine?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would agree.
Like there's different tastes between a middle schooler and a high schooler. So like the norms of what you would like in middle school and high school are different. But when I think of those ratings, I think of it as like PG is for elementary to middle school, and obviously preschool, whatever the fuck you want to say. And then high school was PG-13, and then rated R is whenever you got into college. That's kind of how I was thought about it.
And
like,
I mean, obviously, it depends on the movie too.
It depends on the movie. But like when you ask me about like the MPAA, that's how I always thought of it. Like when I was young,
right?
I always thought, like, okay, when I get to high school, I'm gonna be able to watch so many PG-13 movies. When I get to college, I'm gonna watch so many rated R movies. Obviously, that wasn't the case. Obviously, that was not the case.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the way I thought about it, and I'm pretty sure that's the way the MPAA thought about it, and how the movie industry thought about it as well. Is that they segmented all of these movies into different demographics. That way they are able to target their own their specified audience, because obviously a kid that's 10 years old isn't going to want to watch The Breakfast Club. It's not really.
Well, they wouldn't understand it. They would understand
they
would think it's boring because they don't have the life experience to understand it. It's not relevant to them.
Precisely, yeah. So that's why that age is pretty much theirs, because they already know, the movie industry already knew, like, people below 13 are not going to be interested in those types of movies.
Right.
But the people 13 and, 18, they're going to love it.
Yeah.
So I think that was a smart move.
It was.
For them, because I think making PG-13 movies wasn't necessarily like restricting anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically just like laying what's it called? A foundation or a benchmark for how you can market your movies, pretty much.
Well, and another thing is, from what I understand, I think the MPAA's rating, its official rating, when a movie gets a rating, and we'll talk about this in next week's Let's Talk Movie News. The new Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, the sequel to the original, is coming out this year. It just got its official rating, and I think the official MPAA rating is rated R for bloody violence and gore and language. That is a suggestion. So if you have a rated R film, it's suggested, what is it, 16 and up?
It's 18, I think,
or 18 and older, 16 or 18
yeah.
or something higher teens.
Mm-hmm.
It's a suggestion that no one, let's say 16, below the age of 16 should watch that film. That's a suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know, at least when I was a kid, I remember when I would go see a movie with my dad or with my parents, fortunately, and I'm thankful to my parents for this, I wasn't ever really sheltered from anything. Now, that's not to say that, they never covered my eyes. Every parent's gonna,
because he wasn't sheltered. Look
No.
what he's got in his room.
I know.
A shit ton of masks.
I'm into all this weird stuff now.
That shit right there give me nightmares.
But I mean, like, the reason I'm into horror is because I remember watching Ghost Ship with my mom. I remember watching Halloween with my dad. I remember the first time I watched A Nightmare on Elm Street with my parents. And I think it's okay to let kids see those things if they're okay with it. Now, if you are, as a parent, if you force your kid to sit down and watch something that they don't like or that they're afraid of, you're a terrible parent. That's awful.
Yeah,
but it didn't bother me. I could take it for what it was as a movie. Now, what I will say is I remember going to the movie theater, and you could, at least when we were kids, you could see, or no matter how young you were, you could see a rated R movie if you were with a guardian that bought you the ticket and said you were okay. Now, if you and I were 14 and we went to go see a rated R movie, they wouldn't let us in. But if we were with an adult, they would. So I don't know if it was like that in the 80s or not. We weren't born in the 80s. We were 90s. Yeah. We didn't come until the next decade. But yeah, I wonder if it was like that.
I know for a fact that people snuck into the movies because I did.
Well,
too.
Of course they did.
Like I've snuck in plenty R-rated movies. I'd buy I don't know.
You buy a ticket to like
I would buy
Powerpuff Girls,
Shrek.
and then
I would buy a ticket to Shrek and then go watch the horror movie.
Right.
Like that shit was normal for me.
Care Bears the musical. You go see like I don't know. You go see some awful movie. But so yeah, I don't know how it was with that. But other thing was blockbusters were the new norm, and by blockbuster I mean any film that is incredibly financially, critically successful, with audience, with ticket sales, with marketing, with everything. And it was really, I know there were a lot of crazy epic films in the 70s, but I think in terms of now what we know as a blockbuster, Avengers Endgame was a blockbuster. What's another one?
Of this decade?
Just of the last 20 years or so.
Avatar.
Peter Jackson's King Kong. Godzilla versus Kong. Those movies are blockbusters because they are so financially and critically successful. They're huge. They're not your everyday run of the movie that they do fairly well. They make their money back. Blockbusters are films that are like, holy crap, this is a big deal. Everybody's got to go see this.
And what the type of movies that we saw, the type of blockbusters that happened in the 80s, what were they? I think obviously the Star Wars movies were blockbusters.
Star
at
Wars,
the time. Empire Strikes Back and The Return. Wait, was that?
Yeah.
Return of the Jedi. Okay.
That's actually a good transition into the top 10 highest grossing films of the 1980s. It's a good transition.
Okay. What were they?
The highest grossing film of the 1980s is E.T., which I get it. E.T. is one of Steven Spielberg's most popular movies. It's a fantastic movie. It's amazing. It came out in 1982. It made $435 million at the global box office. That was pretty good. That's pretty good for 19. That's pretty impressive. For the 80s, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Second to that was Return of the Jedi. Came out in the year after. It made $309 million. The Empire Strikes Back made $290 million. So there's two Star Wars out of the gate.
That one always surprised me, to be honest, because Empire Strikes Back is by far one of the best.
That it didn't make more?
Yeah, that one's probably the most impactful movie of the Star Wars franchise.
Would you have put The Empire Strikes Back over Return of the Jedi? If you would have had to guess. I don't mean film quality. I mean, if before you knew that, if you would have guessed which one of them made more money, would you have put The Empire Strikes Back ahead?
Yes, because it had the biggest plot twist of all times. like one of the biggest plot twists of all times. And Return of the Jedi was good, but it was pretty much just like an ending. It was just sealing the story up as it is.
Right.
But Empire Strikes Back was just more I don't know, it just had a lot of plot twists and turns, and I don't know, it was just more heavy of a story than Return of the Jedi.
It was. Yeah. I remember really liking that. The first time I actually sat down and watched them all, I really liked the Empire Strikes Back. I'm dropping shit all over the place, Miguel, but it's fine.
You're just getting emotional.
I am. I'm getting emotional. And then they did the prequels.
Okay, no, okay.
I love the prequels.
We need to do an episode on Star Wars, because I promise you, I'll change your mind with that. Because yes,
I need to rewatch the prequels, because I was not at all into the prequels. I was bored out of my mind.
The prequels were at its time were not good because they were trying to live up to
they're trying to capture the magic in the bottle again.
Yeah, but looking back to it now, it was pretty solid. And now with all of these other side stories about the Clone Wars, like, it made those movies more impactful to people.
Yeah.
So I think now watching,
I understand
it's
that.
actually a pretty decent movie. It's a pretty awesome storyline, because when you think about it, it's talking about one of the most evil villains of our generation, and actually giving him making him out to look like the hero. You know what I mean? Because again, we talk about it at length all the time about like how a great villain is someone who thinks he's the hero in his own story. Yeah. So that's pretty much why I love the Star Wars franchise, because it showed Anakin Skywalker's downfall into the dark side, because he thought he was doing the right thing. But
that's
gonna be an episode. It's gonna be a whole episode on its own.
It will. Well, also, we need to do some Star Wars commentaries too. That's another franchise we need to do commentaries for.
We do. I would love to do that.
Fourth on the list of highest grossing films was Tim Burton's Batman from 1989.
Mm-hmm.
Which that doesn't surprise me. That made $251 million at the global box office. Fifth was Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1961. So the origin of the Indiana Jones, the original trilogy at least.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters was in sixth place, $238 million, the original Ghostbusters film.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy that movie a lot, actually. And it kind of took me a while. I remember when I watched that when I was a kid. I didn't really care about it as much when I was a kid, but going back and rewatching it now that I'm older, I enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like how can I put this right?
I think I understand the humor a little bit. I didn't quite get all the humor and stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's the same thing with like Shrek. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's funny seeing the ghosts and the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and when they're up on the building and things like that. Like, it's fun to see that. But when you're a kid, a lot of the jokes and a lot of the things they're talking about goes like, I mean, it goes right over your head. You don't really understand it.
Yeah.
Seventh place.
Seventh place I want to talk about.
I'm saying this like it's a race. Bum 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 ba dum bum 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 ba dum bum 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 ba dum ba dum bum. Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah.
Beverly Hills Cop made $234 million at the global box office in 1984.
You know what the 80s was a prime time for?
What? Cop movies?
No, that too, obviously. Yeah. Comedian-made movies, comedian-driven movies.
That's fair. And Eddie Murphy, man, dude, Eddie Murphy is one of the funniest people on the planet.
Eddie Murphy really was like in his fucking prime. Delirious.
He was
still by far one of my favorite comedy specials of all time. And again, we'll make that a fucking episode too, because I fucking love those things. But I want a side note, like during the 80s, like so many comedians were just making they're starring in their own feature films, and they were knocking it out of the park. We'll talk about all the different movies later, but like, yeah, the 80s was a prime time for these comedians, especially Eddie Murphy. He was making.
Did Eddie Murphy write Beverly Hills Cop? Do you know?
Not sure. I know he probably made a couple of jokes. Because these comedians make the way it works with these comedians is that like when they're in a film, they pretty much write the the jokes and all that. They see the script and they write their own jokes inside the movie.
Yeah.
And that's why they're so great, because that's why they're so funny too, because these comedians, these great comedians like
Right.
Eddie Murphy's, they make their lines, they write up their lines, and they're solid jokes. They're hilarious.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's why they're so memorable.
Let's see.
And so that's
Beverly
why
Hills Cop is a 1984 American buddy comedy. Directed by Martin Brest, written by Daniel Petrie Jr. So no, he did not write Beverly Hills Cop.
I'm sure he helped co-write it. I'm almost certain.
So it doesn't have him listed as a writer.
There's no way in hell, man.
It just says story by Danilo Bach. If I'm getting your name wrong, I apologize. Daniel Petrie Jr. That's the writers, and Martin Brest is the director. Starring Eddie Murphy and Judge Reinhold. I'm going to go ahead and say this: Judge Reinhold is an incredibly underrated actor from that time period.
Was he?
Yeah. Even in the Santa Claus. I don't know. I'm not even saying he had a huge filmography. I just like him. I like him as an actor, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
But
I got you. Well, okay. Well, let me say this. The writer for Coming to America was Eddie Murphy. So, like, my stance still holds. Is the fact that a lot of these comedy movies back then were written by comedians, and that's why they were so much more impactful.
Right.
Because again, Coming to America is technically a cult classic, if I'm not mistaken. Because
I love that movie.
Yeah, great movie, hilarious, and
Hakeem.
It just Hakeem. Yeah, I'm not gonna say anymore, but
what are you doing?
Which I need to see Coming to America, because I hear that one is killing it. That movie killed.
I haven't watched it, but I do want to watch that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, like I said, like during the time, those comedians, I mean, it was their time to make their own feature films, and they were knocking them out of the park. And we'll talk about more later, but yeah.
It was. Back to the Future was the 8th highest grossing film of the 1980s. It made $210 million worldwide. And then I must say, man, it even beat out Star Wars, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom were the final 2 spots. The entire OG Indiana Jones trilogy made the top grossing films of the decade.
Why do you think that
even beat out Star Wars? I don't know. I went through a little kick when I was a kid of Indiana Jones. Like, I had the whip and I had the fedora and stuff like that. But like, it was never, I never cared about it, I guess, as much as other franchises. I think it probably was a really big deal then. And I know I actually wanted to bring this up now that they're doing Indiana Jones Part 5, and that's been confirmed with Harrison Ford to star. I think part of it was the spectacle. It was that action adventure. You go all over the world and he's pistol whipping people and fighting, and Harrison Ford's kicking ass. Because let's be real, Harrison Ford, he's great, man. He was great in those movies. He was, whether he's swinging from the rope or whether he's, trying to escape some crazy death trap, or, whether he's fighting a whole band of goons. I mean, the Indiana Jones films are spectacle.
Yeah, even in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which came out during our time, like, even though he was old and they emphasized his age during Temple of the Crystal Skull, like, he was still like out there kicking ass, and
it was
still enjoyable to watch him stumble around and kick all of these. I guess they were they Germans or were they Russians? I don't remember.
I don't know.
But sorry, what were you gonna
say? I wanted to bring that up because let me see, Harrison Ford.
Which, by the way, Harrison Ford in general is just a badass kind of guy. Like,
Harrison Ford is 78 years old.
He does not look it.
He is starring in Indiana Jones Part 5. We don't really know a story yet. We don't really know much about it except for the fact that Harrison Ford is starring.
Yeah.
As you said, in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they really kind of emphasized his age and that he couldn't do all of the crazy stuff he used to do. how do you think they're going to go about Indy 5? Because I'm not going to lie, if they could make it, I don't even know if they could do it as more of a detective type thing, because it wouldn't feel like Indy at that point. He's so old. I feel like if it shows him just completely kicking ass and just kicking ass and taking names, wouldn't that feel a little bit strange if you had this almost near 80-year-old man just destroying the entire time?
It's like it's gonna be the same premise as I feel like with Blade Runner 2049. Have you seen that movie?
I have not seen that movie.
Look, Blade Runner is honestly one of the most underrated movies of all time.
I've never even seen the original.
Yeah, which I understand, but it's just so underrated because it's so dystopian era.
Yeah.
And I think probably what will happen is that, they'll get another younger actor to tag along with them, like how they did with King of the Crystal Skull. They may write off Shia LaBeouf because of the shit he's going through.
Yeah, I think Shia LaBeouf is tanked. I don't think they're gonna bring him back at all.
Yeah, so I think they'll probably introduce someone else, like probably carry the mantle, because that was their intention for.
Well,
no, actually, well, they kind of did, but they didn't.
He was still the main character in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah, but you remember at the end, whenever Shia LaBeouf was gonna wear the hat, but whenever he walked off, but whenever Harrison Ford left, he said, "Nope, that's still mine."
He grabbed it from him.
Yeah, so obviously he's going to give the mantle to someone. He's gonna actually give it to someone.
And I'm fine if he gives if they pass the torch at the end of the movie, that's fine. But it's Indiana Jones Part 5. It's not a spin-off of the Indiana Jones series. So my question is, he's old. I mean, he's old. Like, I don't say that. He's in great shape. He looks amazing. But any 80-year-old man or near 80-year-old man is not going to be jumping from train cars and in a fight with 30 people kicking their asses. I mean, it's not going to happen. And, when did Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, when did Kingdom of the Crystal Skull even come out?
It was like early 2010.
Hey Siri, when did Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull release?
Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull
2008.
May 22nd, 2008.
2008. Yeah. So it's been over a decade since that movie. So I mean, he's aged even more.
Let me tell you right now, man. Harrison Ford is a different breed. He's built different from the both of us. This man has crashed two planes.
Yeah, he has,
and has literally walked away scot-free. Like the FAA literally said, they literally revoked his license. They said, you're not allowed to fly anymore.
Yeah,
they literally said that because he's crashed his planes on a number of occasions, and he walked away scot-free. And look, he crashed his plane twice and still made Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah. Do you think we're gonna see Indy?
We're gonna see
just
Indy
tearing it up.
We may see Indy tearing it up, but again, emphasizing his age again.
I mean,
I'm for it.
I hope they pull it off, and I'm wholeheartedly rooting for it because again, it's a great franchise. I mean, again, it wasn't one of my tops when I was a kid,
but we understand.
But I completely appreciate it for what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm anxious. I mean, I'm gonna go see it. I want to see how it ends. I enjoy it, and honestly, I would really like to see how it all ends.
Maybe they might kill him off because they did it in Star Wars. That's the way it goes. Yeah,
you never know.
Much.
Let's talk about a couple of other 80s blockbusters and real popular 80s films. 1980, Airplane. That's a popular one for you.
Yeah, I like that.
Good luck. We're all counting on you.
Good luck. We're all counting on you.
5 minutes later.
There's so many.
Good luck. We're all counting on you. Or when he's sitting in the seat and he's like, it's like buckets of water like pouring off of his face. That movie is hilarious, man.
Surely you can't be serious. I'm dead serious. And don't call me Shirley.
And don't call me Shirley.
There's so many one-liners in Airplanes. Like again, look, Airplanes is one of my favorite movies. I love it. The comedy in that thing, the timing. Again, the comedies in the 80s were just brilliant. They were so how can I put dry humor. That's the best way I can put it. It was
Dude,
all
I love
dry humor.
I love towards the beginning of the movie when they're all in the airport and there's the whole wall of magazines. And it's all like weird, crazy, like there's like sci-fi magazines and pornos and just like all kinds of weird stuff there. I don't know. That movie is awesome.
There's one scene in particular I want to talk about. It's whenever the plane is like being they need to bring in like the pilot, another pilot to like talk the other guy down. And when he was walking through the airport, there's just all these like, you know how like the people like give the flyer like, hey, would you like to donate to this and this and this and this?
Yeah.
And he just like slightly kicking ass, just like knocking people out. It's again, the humor in that movie is just amazing.
The taxi driver who's sitting there through the entire time,
yeah,
still waiting. Have you ever seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High?
Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I think so. Wait, hold on.
Oh my god! If you've never seen it, I have to introduce. I had never heard of this movie until about 3 or 4 years ago, and I watched it with my parents. Dude, it is one of the most 80s movies I have ever seen. Judge Reinhold is in it. Sean Penn is in it. It is great. You would adore this movie. It's fantastic.
No, I've not seen it. Okay,
it's another one. It's a different kind of coming of age thing than The Breakfast Club or St. Elmo's Fire. It's a different kind of thing, but it's still got that like 80s teenage boy vibe, like where the high schoolers and they're just thinking about sex and they're thinking about like what they want out of life and just hanging out with their buddies and working at the mall, just stuff like that. It's a fun movie.
That's really weird because Sean Penn looks like he's like in his mid-30s.
He looks like an infant. He does. He looks really young, but at the same time he looks like a 40-year-old man. It's kind of strange.
Yeah, it's like the whole Grease movie where they're trying to play off these people as like high schoolers, but they're well into their 50s.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I don't know about that.
So in the 70s we had The Godfather. In the 80s, Scarface came out, which I think if we're talking mob movies, I still prefer The Godfather.
Yeah, but if you understand, the mob movies during like from the 70s to the 80s, in the 70s, it was more like organized crime.
Right.
But in the 80s, it was more like, like straight up gangster. Like, showboat everything. Showboat your life. Showboat how much money you're making. Show how much power you're making. All that.
I'll agree with that.
That's why Scarface and Godfather are such different movies. They're polar opposites.
For sure.
It shows different sides of like that. It shows different eras because in the 80s, again, like I'm gonna say right now, it was mainly about drugs. Let's be honest. Here, guys. It was mainly drug-driven.
That's even that's a really interesting point. Scarface is like overly drug heavy. The Godfather, literally the entire premise of The Godfather is that they're kind of the different families are going at war because Vito Corleone denies getting into the drug business. He doesn't want to get into the drug business. He thinks that's a shitty thing to do. He doesn't want to get into the drug business. That's why they try to assassinate him. That's part of the whole deal. And of course there's other things too. That's not the only plot point. But that's kind of an interesting parallel. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, because like if you look at Beverly Hills Cop, because what was he doing? He was looking for the killer of his best friend and ended up being just a drug thing. Ended just being a drug bust pretty much. Yeah.
Again.
So
Cook.
Cook. But you agree with me to the point like the 80s was pretty much very driven with the drugs.
100%. 100%.
Like most of them were pretty much. And I mean, I don't
and
know.
Again, that's not that's not a knock at the 80s. That's just culture. It was starting to like become a thing at that point.
Again, like drugs in the 70s was very it was known, it was used, it was popular, but it was frowned upon.
It was. Yeah.
But
not saying it was right.
Yeah.
But it was.
But yeah, it was like really hitting down on that. But in the 80s, it was like, okay, it's here. Like we're going to use it because it's here. And obviously there are moments where, federal government trying to like stop them there, which I understand, but like it was more inducted into culture, society. You know what I mean?
Right.
So again, like if I'm looking at all these lists of movies, like Lethal Weapon, Beverly Hills Cop, Scarface, what was the other one? Coming? No, I'm not gonna say that. What else? Die Hard. Like, yeah, all of those. Like, I mean, they were pretty much. They had like drug elements in the movie because it was just so common in that time. And I think it's really interesting there because to point out things that were happening in that decade and how it was integrated in these movies. Because those are important. Because these movies during the decades, they pretty much tell us what that decade was like.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
Like,
for sure.
mm,
Yeah.
because
Well,
that's
and that's another interesting thing. It's like the 80s. The 80s reflected the decade.
yes,
I think more so than any other decade.
it
You
did.
know, especially the 90s, the 70s a little bit more, but the 80s, it was a direct reflection. Everything had to do. And again, look at all the coming of age films. Look at all the teenager films.
Yep.
The Brat Pack with all the John Hughes films. You had A Christmas Story come out in 1983. Bob Clark, who directed Black Christmas, which it still blows my mind that the same guy that directed A Christmas Story directed Black Christmas, but we're not even going to go there.
Yeah.
The Terminator came out in the 80s. Do you realize that?
That's insane. Which, by the way, I'm so surprised how much has changed from that movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because the Terminator was initially like, if you think about it, like the first Terminator was kind of like a Halloween movie.
It was.
Yeah, it was pretty much that same premise, and then it turned into this whole, big universe thing. And
well, he switched sides.
Yeah, he switched sides.
For all intents and purposes, he was the bad guy in the first movie, and then he became the good guy. Also, I'm going to say this, and again, we need to do an episode on sequels that are better than the original. T2 is way better than T1.
Both are good in their own rights, but at face value, yeah, T2 is by far
like
better.
I mean, I like you said, I like them all. They're all good in their own right. But if I'm picking one to watch, I'm picking T2.
Yeah.
And T3 gets a lot of hate, and I don't even really get the hate for T3. I think T3 is fine.
Yeah, it's
a little more CGI'd and sensationalized, but I mean, it's still a fun movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, another one that I didn't even think about, Amadeus came out, and
look, guys, listeners, viewers, the two of us are very musically like educated, I guess. So like we've seen like Amadeus like one way too many times.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like I mean, I was surprised that came out. It looks like a movie that came out in like the fucking 60s or something.
Well, yeah, and I mean, like, honestly, it's not, for those of you who don't know, Amadeus is the origin story. I say that in quotations of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It's accurate, but it's not completely historically accurate. A lot of it is, again, kind of sensationalized. The whole thing where it kind of implies that Salieri killed Mozart, that's not really, I don't think that's really true. I mean, there's always been speculation that happened, but Mozart, I mean, there could have been anything. I mean, I don't know.
A playboy.
It's a good movie. He was a playboy. He was. I mean, the first time you see him, he's sleeping with a fat chick. He is. Yeah. He's supposed to be going out on stage, and he's sleeping with some heavy woman, like in a room. I mean, like, that's the first time you're introduced to him. And that's, that's how he's portrayed. And I mean, from everything I've studied, that's kind of how he was. He was kind of like wild and crazy and whatever. The Goonies came out. I love The Goonies, man. The Goonies is an incredible movie. I found you, One-Eyed Willie.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys.
I think this this decade also bred the theme of like adventure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
like
not only adventure,
like
adventure with kids too. And I think that's cool. I think that's part of the reason that Stranger Things is so popular, is because Stranger Things plays on the retro 80s vibe and the whole pop culture thing. But Stranger Things also plays on that kids going out and exploring, and like the kids are the ones who save the day. The kids are the ones who not even necessarily just save the day, but they make it at the end. They have this big adventure, once in a lifetime thing, and you know that was a really big deal then. Lethal Weapon came out in 1987. Another great cop movie.
Yeah.
I actually haven't watched Lethal Weapon in a long time. That would be a good rewatch one of these days.
I agree. But one thing that really cracks me up is I never understood it. Okay, guys, like if you're listening, guys, please explain to me in detail, why is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
What? Are we talking about Lethal Weapon or Die Hard?
No, I'm talking about Die Hard now, because you mentioned Lethal Weapon.
Oh, it made you think of Die Hard. I was like, what? I was like, those are two different movies, bro.
Yeah, but
both 80s movies, but two different movies.
But yeah, you know what I'm talking.
It's set. They say it's set at Christmas, and it is. It's set at Christmas time, but I don't think just because a movie is set at Christmas time makes it a Christmas movie. I mean, it's not going to be like Elf, Christmas with the Cranks, Christmas Vacation, Die Hard, Charlie Brown. I mean, like that doesn't make any sense. Like that.
Yeah, if you were to list them off, yeah. But I know some families do it. I went to someone's house for Christmas, and they had Die Hard on.
Families do it.
I was like, really? I was expecting like Home Alone or something like that.
I picture like a family in like matching Christmas pajamas, all sitting like in front of a fire, huddled around. And it's fucking Bruce Willis like crawling through the air vent.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, really?
That's pretty funny.
By the way, the Die Hard franchise is just awesome as it is. It's not Christmas level movie, but it's a decent franchise, I'll be honest.
Yeah. I know we got one you'll like. Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal Jacket. There is a line I could say, I think verbatim. You know what I think I'm gonna say?
No.
It's a scene in Full Metal Jacket where the reporter is being transported to the location, and the guy in the helicopter he's on the machine gun, and he is just laying it down on the field, and the reporter is telling the guy, he was like, so like, do you do this every day? And the guy's like, yeah, every single day. And the guy's like, okay, but do you shoot women and children too? He was like, yeah, probably. And the reporter was like, how could you shoot women and children? And the guy literally said, with wholehearted intention, he said, oh, it's easy, man. You just don't lean on it so much. Ain't war hell? I was like, what? I was like, what? Yo, Full Metal Jacket really like reflected the horrors of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, it did.
Like
that's a rough movie.
The idiocy and the ridiculousness of the Vietnam War. Okay, guys, I'm not bashing the war at all, but there are aspects of every single war that was just absolute atrocities. And Full Metal Jacket pretty much depicted like the worst parts of the Vietnam War, but made into like a little bit of a comedy.
Yeah. And it's like a dramedy type.
Yeah, a dramedy. Yeah. And Full Metal Jacket, it's such a heavy comedy movie, pretty much the way I put it.
I think my dad really likes Full Metal Jacket.
It has its moments. That right there is one of them.
Yeah,
it's really tough.
Have you ever seen Raising Arizona?
Mm-mm.
Raising Arizona it's a comedy film. Nick Cage plays this redneck, again, Arizona, just out in the middle of nowhere. Come on, honey. Where I haven't seen it in a while. I think they steal a baby at some point and like raise it as theirs. It's funny. It's a really funny movie. RoboCop came out in 1987. Another really great action film. Dead or Alive, You're Coming With Me.
By the way, the soundtrack to that, fucking baller.
Fire, right? Really good. Straight fire. Very good soundtrack.
By the way, the soundtracks of the 80s were just absolutely baller.
Amazing.
Talk about that.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Well, they used action. It was less I mean, they still had scores, but there was also a lot of like pop songs like integrated in movies from the 80s too, which was
I was
cool.
gonna mention
And
that,
it worked again, fit in
Mhm.
pop culture. That was a big pop culture thing.
Mm-hmm. There were so many soundtracks to movies that were made by bands.
That's
You know what I
true.
mean?
Yes.
Like a lot
Yes.
of popular 80s songs were primarily from movies that were happening during that decade. So let me check one. Okay, yeah, Footloose.
Yeah.
Kenny Loggins, popular during that time, absolutely killing it. When that movie came out and he did some of the soundtracks to it, guess what? That those songs right there are still phenomenal during this decade.
Definitely.
They still have that nostalgic feel. They still carry weight to the
Yep.
people of this generation, to the point where they made a remake, which
Mhm.
again, it was terrible, but it's the fact that it had enough weight to make it had enough
Right.
weight to deem a remake.
Right.
So I just think that back in the 80s, like these soundtracks that were like primarily produced by these popular bands of its time, that was a beautiful time to do it.
Yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
know they tried to do that with a lot of I know in like the early 2000s they tried doing it with the pop artists of that time, but they didn't really hit as much, let's be honest. But the 80s, my god, they were sick.
They were. It was pretty dope. You know what's another 80s movie? And honestly, I don't know if I ever even really attributed this to a decade. I was kind of shocked to find out it came out in 88. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? I loved that movie when I was a kid, man.
Was that the start of like animated and live action people?
No, because look at Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins came out in the 60s. And Mary
Yeah.
Poppins did that. Disney was kind of the pioneer of that. But I don't know. I know like everybody's been freaking out about the Space Jam sequel trailer. I think it looks like garbage. I'm not gonna lie, I really do. And it's
think
nothing against LeBron. It's nothing against Space Jam. I love the OG Space Jam, but Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Space Jam and Mary Poppins? It doesn't. It's not over the top. Like it's the animation mixed with the live action. Like of course it's sensationalized and it's kind of like whoa, like it looks kind of strange, but the fact that it looks strange works for it. Space Jam, it's like they tried to make the animation and the real stuff match and both look real, and it's weird. It just doesn't. I also think the Space Jam 2 trailer looks like it's got way too much going on. They're trying to fit way too much in that one movie.
It does.
Like they needed to keep it simple, keep it the Looney Tunes like it always has been. But like King Kong was in that trailer, and like just like why? Like why do you need all of that other like every property that Warner Brothers has ever owned?
Yeah.
Like why do you need that in one movie? Why? Like there's no point.
It got to the point where they were adding like if you like did analysis of that trailer, you would see a lot of Warner Bros. Owned properties that are not supposed to be in there. One for instance,
really,
Pennywise was in there.
Really? What?
Yep, Pennywise is in it. If you look at it, the crazy people from A Clockwork Orange. You know what I'm talking about? That movie.
I need to go back and watch this trailer then.
Yeah, there's they're in the audience, but like they're just there because they're owned by Warner Bros.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of like things in there that I'm like, I don't think they would need to be in there, but obviously they don't have like any weight in that movie, but it's just weird to see them in that.
That's very strange. And then of course, if we're talking the 80s, you got to talk the John Hughes movies with the Brat Pack. Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Andrew McCarthy, Judd Nelson, Demi Moore, Molly Ringwald, Ali Sheedy, Rob Lowe. I mean, that whole Rat Pack thing was amazing. 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, St. Elmo's Fire, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller. I mean, just all of those teenage coming of age films hit different, as the kids say now. Like they really do, man. I mean, it's just even though look at The Breakfast Club or even Pretty in Pink. Julia and I just went a few months ago. They had the 25th anniversary of Pretty in Pink, or the 35th or whatever it is. The anniversary of Pretty in Pink in the movie theater. and it was fun. It was really cool seeing that in the movie theater. I mean, it's great. All of John Hughes movies are great. I mean, you had Mr. Mom with Michael Keaton from 1983. That's a real funny movie. National Lampoon's Vacation, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And you also had European Vacation and Christmas Vacation, which is my favorite movie of all time. I mean, I think there were so many really, really good, really, really good John Hughes movies from that era.
You mentioned the Brat Pack. So like those are like actors that they were just in like the same movies over and over again, right?
They were all kind of in the same.
Like they were cast in different movies.
Yeah, they weren't playing the same characters. They were just they're the Rat Pack because they were cast together so much.
That reminds me of Happy Madison. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like with Adam Sandler. Like Adam Sandler pretty much is doing the Brat Pack because you have all of these different comedians. Because I mean, honestly, I'm not gonna lie, everyone in his friend groups are in all of his movies. Like look at Grown Ups.
Right.
Grown Ups is the culmination
for sure
of all of his movies just coming together. And I think in the 80s, that was like one of the times where it was really well known. Again, with the Brat Pack, it pioneered something like you're at the studio, like knowing what actors they want and just making movies solely on their list.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool to think about.
Even look at the vacation movies. I mean, of course, Chevy Chase, Beverly D'Angelo, Randy Quaid, which Randy Quaid has lost his marbles. He's a psycho now. You know, they were there's like the core cast in all the vacation films, but the kids change every single time.
Mm-hmm.
That was even kind of like a funny casting thing. The silent majesty of a winter's morn. The clean, cool chill of the holiday air. Mm-hmm. An asshole in his bathrobe emptying a chemical toilet into my sewer. Dude, Christmas Vacation is my favorite movie of all time. I could watch that movie right now and just laugh the entire time. It's literally my favorite movie ever, man. But yeah, man, John Hughes. Even Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I've always loved Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I mean, like everything.
That's one of my favorite movies.
When they steal the car, or when they finally convince him to take the car, and they leave it at the parking garage, and the two guys take it for a ride all the time, and the miles are wrong, and it's just, man, it's such a fantastic movie. The other cool thing was you had some pretty crazy sci-fi films in the 80s too. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Escape from New York. You would really like Escape from New York. Have you ever seen that movie with Kurt Russell? That was a John Carpenter directed movie. John Carpenter, who wrote the original Halloween, actually co-wrote Escape from New York with what's his name? I'm drawing a blank.
This movie looks weird AF.
What?
Escape from New York.
Dude, it's awesome. The soundtrack is amazing.
Is it?
Absolutely amazing, yeah.
Did you hear
Nick Castle? That's who I'm thinking. I don't know why I couldn't think of Nick Castle's name.
Did you know Lee Wanell wants Wyatt Russell for Escape from New York reboot?
He'd be playing his dad's role?
Yeah.
Holy crap. That'd
be pretty dope.
I'd be kind of down for it. I really would, because Snake Plissken, man, I mean, Kurt Russell plays a badass in that movie. Like, he's a criminal. Basically, the plot of Escape from New York, without spoilers, it's futuristic, and the island of Manhattan has been turned into a maximum security prison. It's just a free for all. If you're a convicted like murderer or rapist or felon or whatever, you go there, and they just drop you in Manhattan, and it's this like weird dystopian apocalyptic cityscape. And Donald Pleasance plays the president, and the Air Force One is going over, and Air Force One crashes. It's sabotaged, and the president gets lost in Manhattan in this huge maximum security prison. Kurt Russell's character, Snake Plissken, who was a convicted criminal, they send him in and they're like, we will give you a complete pardon if you save the president. So that's basically the whole. It's dope, man. It's 80s and it's kind of stupid, but it's fun. It's awesome. It's not even stupid. It's dope. I love that movie. And I actually saw it for the first time like about a year and a half ago. I had never heard of it, and then it was on TV, and my dad was like, "No, you need to watch this. It's pretty dope." Of course, Back to the Future. Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me you built a time machine? I love Michael J. Fox, man.
In a DeLorean. Yeah. Did you know Rick and Morty pretty much? Did you know Rick and Morty is pretty much based off of Back to the Future?
Is it really?
Like Rick and Morty are based off of Doc and Michael J. Fox character. If you think about it.
Oh.
It's basically that kid following this old man who's doing these wacky scientific stuff, and pretty much the same.
I've never
obviously Rick and Morty's way out of the ballpark, but with the story, it's pretty dark.
I've never even really watched Rick and Morty all that much. I mean,
it was a favorite for a while. I think you remember when we had Blake's bachelor party. Which, by the way, shout out to Blake. Love you, man. Hope you're doing well. We need to catch up soon. But we remember when we went to his bachelor party and we just ended up doing a marathon of Rick and Morty. Holy shit, you weren't there.
I wasn't there. Yeah, I don't know where I was, but I wasn't there.
Okay, I got you.
So no, I don't remember that.
And
I was coming back from a trip. I was on vacation. I was out of town. That's where I was.
Mm-hmm.
I was out of town.
Okay.
Yeah,
makes sense.
I was on my way back when you guys were at the bachelor party.
Okay.
I met you at the wedding. Yeah, I met you at the wedding the next day because I was taking pictures. Yeah.
But yeah, Back to the Future again was just right for his decade, man.
A DeLorean.
It really was. The DeLorean. It made the DeLorean so popular during his time.
It did.
Even though mechanically it's a fucking terrible car. Yeah. It's a terrible car.
And I also got to say, Christopher Lloyd. I mean, Michael J. Fox is an American treasure. He really is. But Christopher Lloyd played that role beautifully. The whole weird craziness and like off the wall with the inventions, and when he's in his house and he's like rummaging through everything. He played that like kind of wild and crazy thing perfectly.
Great Scott.
Right?
Yeah. He had a cameo in 1,000 Ways to Die in the West.
Did he?
You know that? Yeah.
I didn't.
Have you ever seen that? It's Seth MacFarlane movie. You got to watch it. It's funny as fuck.
I've never seen that.
But he had a little cameo in it, and Seth MacFarlane like finds this flashing light in a barn, and he comes in. He's like, "What's going on?" And Doc is like flipping the DeLorean. He's like, "Oh, just a weather experiment." It's very much like connecting. Like this is when he got to the Western. Yeah. Back to the Future 3.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then but before we wrap up here, we got to talk about the 80s horror movie craze.
I'm looking at your list right now. Holy fuck, you planned for that.
Because, I didn't even really plan for it. It just, there's so much. There's so much in that 80s horror list.
That was the start of a lot of horror icons.
It was.
Yes, the 80s was. I'll agree.
It was horror. I'm yawning. I don't know why. Because it's late. Horror in the 80s was outrageous. It was completely off the charts, just like wild and crazy for no reason. And again, we've talked about that with the pop culture. A lot of these movies, horror, action, comedy, it was kind of wild. For no reason. Like it was just wild to be wild. Again.
I'm pretty sure
right?
most of the writers that made those movies, they did like 4 or 5 lines when they were done with the script.
But people couldn't get enough of it. And that kind of goes back. I think the horror craze in the 80s is what set it up is the success of Halloween and Jaws and The Exorcist and Black Christmas and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those films were serious. They weren't kind of playful and joking. I mean, The Exorcist is a serious movie.
Jaws It scared a lot of Catholics.
Yeah. The Exorcist scared a lot of people in general.
Yeah.
But they were serious. And then you get to the 80s, and kind of the stereotype is that the first film is serious, and then everything after that is just kind of like balls to the wall and weird. Halloween, there were 4 Halloween films that came out in the 80s: 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2 came out in 1981. 3 came out the year after, and again 3 they tried to do something just kind of completely different with what was John Carpenter's original intention, was to do an anthology thing for Halloween. Every year it would be a different movie about a Halloween themed thing, which that didn't work. People were pissed that Michael Myers wasn't in it, so they brought him back for 4 and 5, and then of course they continued in the 90s. But I think Jason Voorhees with Friday the 13th completely dominates the 80s horror thing.
Yes.
In terms of numbers, I mean, almost, I think every Friday the 13th film, but the last 3 of them came out in the 80s. Friday the 13th came out in 1980. Part 2 came out in 81. 3 came out in 82. The final chapter, which really wasn't the final chapter, came out in 84. A New Beginning was in 5. Jason Lives came out in 86. New Blood was in 88. Jason Takes Manhattan was in 89. I mean, these movies, it was like every single year. Like, I feel like they finished production on one of them, and they'd be like, well, it's going to be a hit. We got to do another one. Start where I want a script on my desk tomorrow. Like that, I feel like that's how they were working. And I mean, if you look at, the first 4, you can kind of take it as somewhat serious. But if you take, A New Beginning on through Jason Takes Manhattan and even into the end of that franchise, it's balls to the wall.
They go ballistic.
It's
in regards to the
wild. It's
in regards to story.
It's just crazy sauce all the way through. And same thing with Nightmare on Elm Street. The first Nightmare on Elm Street is very serious. It's very, it's dark. And then you get to part 2 and 3 and 4, and it was a little bit different. We got what we call MTV Freddy, where Freddy he was funny. Like, you kind of rooted for Freddy because he was hilarious. Like, the stuff he said, the way he acted, he was hilarious. And Robert Englund played him so well. Do you know the whole thing about A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2? With the homoeroticness of it?
No.
So we need to watch A Nightmare. Have you seen A Nightmare on Elm Street, like the first one?
No.
Okay.
It's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah, we'll rewatch that one. The first one was serious. The second one, it was serious, but you'll understand what I mean when I watch this. In Never Sleep Again, which is the documentary about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, they were asked point blank, were you trying to make a gay movie? And I say this with all up respect, were you trying to make a gay movie? Because it was like, there are so many little things, like the main character, Mark Patton, great actor, love him. He was a gay actor. They originally wanted a scene where, Freddy comes out of him a lot of times. They wanted a scene where Freddy opened his mouth and took one of the blades and basically like went like this inside of his mouth with the blade. There's a lot of homoerotic things in that movie, and it's a little strange. And it's kind of funny because all the filmmakers were like, we didn't intend that to happen, but
it just happened.
It kind of happened. But I love A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. Freddy's Revenge is awesome. And then, of course, you get into 2, 3, and 4, and it's kind of, and 5 especially, it's real strange. And then you have the whole laundry list of horror films that came out. John Carpenter's The Fog, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, which, The Shining is one of the greatest psychological thrillers of all time.
Yes.
It is. It's incredible. The Howling came out, which is another, it's a werewolf film that I've actually never seen that. The original My Bloody Valentine, Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead, An American Werewolf in London, which I actually just bought it's over here somewhere.
Yeah, you bought the copy, didn't you?
Yes, I bought the, what collector's edition is that? the Arrow Video Collector's Edition of American Werewolf in London. We'll probably do a commentary on that at some point because I've never seen it. I've heard a lot about it. I've heard great things about it, but I've never seen it. That'd be a fun one to watch because neither one of us have ever seen it. So that would be like our initial reaction to the commentary. John Carpenter's The Thing, Poltergeist, what's her name? Marianne? What's her name?
In Poltergeist?
Is it Marianne? Marianne? No. What's her name? I haven't seen Poltergeist in a long time.
But that's still like a
Carol Ann. The entire movie. They say it like 58 times. Day of the Dead came out in the 80s, and that was that's the conclusion of George Romero's original zombie trilogy. They're considered the 3 greatest zombie films of all time. Return of the Living Dead, which I still want to sit down and watch the Return of the Living Dead movies with you. You would adore them. They're zombies films, but they're spoofy and they're funny. It's really good. It's your kind of like dumb dark humor that I feel like you would actually like really appreciate. And that's a perfect example of like, you had movies, the 70s were a lot more serious than the 80s, and that, you could have films going back to that easy to market, easy plot, simple plot, everybody can understand it. It didn't have to be some crazy plot line to drive the narrative forward. You could have a silly spoofy film just to have a silly spoofy film, and that was okay. But yeah, so many amazing movies. I mean, we could go on about this stuff for hours. You know what I mean?
I agree, but
we really could, and obviously we don't have hours to spend. But yeah, and I'm sure we will continue to explore the 80s more throughout, more episodes and through commentaries. I want to start getting more into commentaries and things like that, because I enjoy that stuff. I think that's fun.
I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, honestly. Even though this episode was just was like talking about the 80s, my guys, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
And this is one of our longer episodes too.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we've talked a lot. We've gone over a whole lot of different things, but man, it's such a loaded decade. There's just a lot going on there. But it's a lot of really, really good things. And I think, I mean, it was the inspiration for our our top and our bottom of the show, our whole layout of the show, our intro, our all the music you hear, everything on our social media accounts. The look of our show was inspired by that retro, crazy, wild pop culture thing. You know what I mean? Because there's something, even if we weren't born in the 80s, but when you're watching an 80s
with it,
right? And when you're watching an 80s movie, you feel nostalgic, and it kind of doesn't even make any sense, but you have a weird nostalgic homey vibe when you watch an 80s movie, and there's just nothing like it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's because because obviously our parents were very much, they lived their young adult life in the 80s, so that's something that they grew up on. So whenever we were raised, most of the movies we saw that they loved were pretty much primarily based in the 80s, and that's what we grew up watching. I mean, for us, me and Brad as movie lovers, and to see all those movies that our parents loved back then, and we understand why they were loved. I mean, it just makes sense why the two of us were just so we adore the 80s so much, because I mean, there are so many great movies in every single genre. No genre is left behind. No genre doesn't have a great movie.
Absolutely, perfectly put. So
I mean, it's one of those decades that I hold near and dear to my heart. Granted, there are some wacky shit that happened in the 80s that we can talk about later. But in regards to movies, yeah, exactly. But in regards to
every time, show my Coke.
Yeah, product placement, guys. But yeah, the movies in the 80s were just by far they have a special place in my heart, because I know the 70s were pretty much pioneering everything that's happened in the movie industries since then, but the 80s capitalized on it and they made so many great movies that all of us look. I'm sure there's for some of you guys listening or watching, there's 80s movies that we haven't talked about that you know of and you just love so much because there's just so much in there.
Right.
And I think that for everyone that has that's anyone that's a movie goer, lover, or just loves the movies in general, I know the 80s is your favorite decade because it's just filled with so many great directors and movies, whether it's comedy, horror, rom-coms. We didn't even talk about When Harry Met Sally, which is by far one of the best.
I know. There were a whole bunch on our list that we didn't get to.
Yeah. So again, I'm sure we'll talk more about the 80s as the next episodes progress on. But yeah, just guys, just understand 80s in our minds and in our hearts, the 80s was by far one of the best decades of all time.
Absolutely. And I think a whole lot of people feel that same way. Guys, we will continue to check out 80s movies more as we go on, but that is going to do it for episode 18 of Let's Talk Movies. This has been the middle entry in our decade series where we are talking the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. Next week, we are talking movies of the 1990s, and that's going to wrap up our series. Be sure to check out our new movie news show, which is dropping every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. New episodes of this show will continue to drop at Mondays at 8 p.m. But be sure to check out that movie news show where we're talking only movie news. That's a real fun time. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And we hope everything is great in your world, and we will talk to you guys soon. Peace.